right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening for Hand in Hand Present Levels and Goals. My name is Mandy Sonnenberg. I serve as the Assistant PTI Manager here at ECAC. Anastasia, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anastasia, and I'm a parent educator at the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center, and we are very excited to have you here. We're going to give it another 2 minutes. If you see in the bottom right corner, there's a QR code. If you will use your phone to hover over that code, and it's going to ask you a question, and we're going to talk about it in just a minute. We're going to wait about 1 more minute for everybody to get logged in, and then we're going to get started. Also putting the link in the chat if you can't use the QR code so that you can participate as well. Okay, Mandy, let's get started. So we're going to get started looking at the results of our QR code. Okay, so for this question, we asked you, what do you think about data?
And the results are, we'll download it.
Okay, well, let's see.
Well,
We have some.
How you feel about data. Let's put it in the chat. Some people don't really know what data is. Some people don't know what that means. What does data mean to you when you think about IEPs? It drives everything. Tells a great story. It's helpful information. Someone says love data. I agree. Data is helpful and it is strengthening. Some people may not know what data is. It's not always accurate if not taken consistently. It can be subjective. It's important to the goals of the IEP. It's okay.
Okay.
It depends on how it's taken. There you go. You got it to work.
Sorry for, I'll give you back your control in a second okay, so one spot would be necessary. I agree. If we had data all in one spot, that would be helpful. It is a goal setting opportunity, valuable, necessary, documents progress. For some of us, it's challenging, frustrating. It makes us angry. It's helpful for determining growth. Where does it come from? That is a great question. Too restrictive, confusing. It's a story. There's a story behind the number. We will be recording and we will send you a copy of our presentation afterwards for the person that you asked. Helpful, useful. These are all very great. You know, as a former teacher, I love data, but it can be very confusing, especially when we don't explain it well. But one of the reasons we ask this question to get us started is to have a good IEP, it needs to be data driven. And we're going to talk a lot about that today. We're going to get started though with learning a little bit about the Exceptional Children's Assistance Center. Thank you for telling me about your experiences with data.
All right. So let me get back in here. All right. So a little bit about ECAC. So we are a private nonprofit parent organization committed to improving the lives of education of all children through a special emphasis on children with disabilities. And we do this by providing information, education, outreach, and support to and for families across the state of North Carolina. ECAC serves as North Carolina's Parent Training Information Center, or PTI. PTIs are federally funded programs through the United States Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, also known as OSEP. The Individuals with Disability Education Act requires that every state have at least one PTI to serve as a free resource to families. ECAC helps parents navigate early intervention, special education systems, and transition to adulthood. We help them to know their rights, to use their voice. We provide information, support, training, and resources to assist families caring for children with special needs from birth to age 26, as well as educators and professionals who serve them. We also support young adults with disabilities in becoming self-advocates and leaders. We serve all 100 counties, and all of our services to families are at no cost. And our services to professionals are at either no cost or low cost. PTIs are required to be primarily staffed by parents of children with disabilities, and all of our parent educators are parents with children, and some now adults, that have a variety of disabilities, including autism, ADHD, deafblindness, learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and more. Families are able to connect with us easily, knowing that we have been there, done that, or are currently experiencing much of what they are experiencing. Now, let's learn about some of the programs that we collaborate with. So, as I said before, we serve as North Carolina's Parent and Training Information Center. We serve families birth to 26, educators, professionals, we provide that support. ECAC also partners with multiple agencies that have a shared desire to improve the outcome for children with disabilities. These partnerships include the North Carolina Deafblind Project. ECAC works in collaboration with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and Eastern Carolina University. The North Carolina State Improvement Project is a program in the Exceptional Children Division of North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and is funded by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. NCSIP works to improve the quality and effectiveness of educational programs and instruction to students with disabilities in North Carolina. The North Carolina Infant Toddler Program provides early intervention supports and services for families and their children birth to 3 who have special needs. ECAC has a contract with collaborative work with the NCITP to promote family engagement and leadership opportunities across the state. ECAC also provides training materials to educate families about child development, early childhood transitions, and their rights under IDA. We also have a preschool development grant, or PDG, which focuses on enhancing family engagement, involvement, and activities for local interagency coordinating councils. We also have LENS, which is Learning for Equity, a network of solutions. The focus of this project is on the intersection of race, educational equity, and the learning differences. LENS seeks to improve the lives of 1 in 5 children who struggle with learning and attention issues, and then less than favorable outcomes for those who are low-income students and students of color who even face greater challenges in our educational systems. Family to Family Health Information Center, we serve as North Carolina's Family to Family Health Information. F2Fs are family-led centers funded by the Health Resource and Service Administration. F2F staff provide critical support to families caring for children with special health care needs, particularly families with children with complex needs and those from diverse communities. F2Fs also provide state and federal agencies, to include legislators and other stakeholders, to better understand and serve the population and their family. The STAR program, this is a new pre-employment transition service, or PREETS program. We are launching this in conjunction with Disability In, funded by NC Voc Rehab. This program is for youth with disabilities ages 16 to 21 who want to plan for life post high school and is ideal for students who has an IEP or a 504 with limited access to pre-ed services through their school. Just so you know, this has a rolling start deadline. So please, 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 if you're interested, share. All right. So upon completion of today's webinar, you should be able to identify how present levels and IEP goals go hand in hand, summarize what present levels and goals should include, and prepare to participate in upcoming meetings. Back to you, Anastasia.
Okay. So we are going to talk about present levels and goals, and then we're going to do some hands-on work. Now, it is going to be very important when we get to the hands-on work that you guys are ready to type and communicate with us, because I think that this is information that you really have to practice with. It takes time to understand, and it's much better if you guys are doing it and not me. So present levels should include the following: what a child can do, what they cannot do, and why it matters. So any present level for any area of functioning should include their current level of functioning, what they're able to do in this moment, data from the previous IEP, as well as any assessment results, and then how that deficit affects a child's ability to learn and access the general curriculum. So why does it matter? Why does this require specially designed instruction? So goals. Goals should be directly related to the given present levels. They need to be clear, concise, and measurable. Everyone who reads a goal should be able to understand the goal as well as how it will be progress monitored. So if you hand me anyone's IEP, I should be able to read that goal and understand what they are looking at, how it's going to be measured and tracked. If you can hand that goal to a stranger and you are not sure what it means, then it needs to be rewritten. Goals need to be clear and concise so that everybody can understand them. So, real world application, my favorite. So this is a goal. Student will review what he has written to ensure he has fully expressed his ideas prior to turning in his assignments. Student can do so internally, out loud, or with teacher peer assistance when appropriate to classroom activities. So in the chat, please write what is problematic about that goal. It's not a SMART goal, okay? It's not measurable. Internally, that's my favorite, internally. How is internally measured? So if I am internally reviewing, I may just think a thought about this goal, and I might think a thought about my paper, and that's it. Now, this is a real goal, a real school system, a real child, a real family had this goal as on their IEP. This is not measurable. There is no way to measure this. There is no way to data track this, because you have to think, what is an explicit skill? So will review can mean a lot of different things. What skill are we looking at specifically? This was a writing assignment. They wanted him to read his writing assignment and judge whether he had hit the indicators, whether there was a theme, there was a topic sentence, and then 3 descriptions. This would be much better completed with something like a checklist, or where he reviewed it and could highlight that specific information. But this is not measurable, and there's no way that we can look at this goal, know how to implement it, and be informed from it. It's a good question as to what a fully expressed idea. This is why it's so important to be able to look at these goals and they should be specific enough that you can read it and understand it. There are too many options here, and there's no way to move forward with that. This is a good question. And so somebody wrote in the chat, is this really necessary as compared to a child without a disability that is learning to do the same thing? So it depends. It depends on that child and their functioning. For a child who may be about to exit, they may be working on skills that are much more closely aligned with their general education peers. Whether it's necessary depends very much on that specific student. And without knowing them, I'm not sure, but I do think that it needs to be rewritten. So let's talk about the things we should see in a goal. So a goal should be written about an observable skill. It should be something discrete that if Mandy saw it, if I saw it, it's the same. There's no flexibility. It's discrete. We need a criterion for mastery. That previous goal didn't have a criteria. How do we know when we reach it? We don't know where we're going without that criterion for mastery. We also need a method for measuring progress. What are we going to use to look at that goal? How are we going to track it? And this is important because this is where your data is coming from. Whatever they put in that box, that is where your data is coming from. If it says a checklist, then when you request your data, you should see a checklist. If it says data sheets, should be data sheets. If it says informal assessments, those are your like classroom tests. If it says running records, they should have anecdotal data. Whatever is in that box, that is the data that should be used to inform our instruction and to inform the goals for the next year. It is to inform our present levels for the next year. It should also tell you whether they're going to have assistive technology and whether it's related to transition goals. In addition, at the bottom, it should tell you if there are any supplemental aids or services that are going to be used. For example, on this first one on this page, they're using a text tracker to help with decoding, which would be a supplemental aid that you want to put in there that's supposed to help this child with his goal. And this is a fake child, by the way, everybody. It's not a real one. But these are the parts of a goal that are necessary and need to be documented in our IEPs. So, what is the goal here? What is the actual goal here? You guys tell me in the chat. What is Henry supposed to do? So if we read this, so he is supposed to use writing strategies taught to him to plan out and write a rough draft to include introductory sentence, a minimum of 3 supporting details, and a closing sentence. It can be a lot of skills at once. It depends whether that's appropriate for him, really depends on where he is, but he's basically supposed to write an essay that includes 3 paragraphs and each paragraph is correct. So that's his goal here. You are correct, Mr. You guys are correct that it is hard to measure something like that. What is 80% of an essay, which is again something to talk about at your IEP meetings. If you have a goal and it says something like that, ask them what that means. So, and then have that documented for later discussions that's what that meant, because 80% of an essay to me may not look like 80% of an essay to someone else, because this is a written work. Are we counting every sentence? Is a good question. So right now, looking at just the parts, what is the criterion for mastery? Somebody else wrote that as well already. 80%. So we're looking for 80% accuracy. And I don't know because I don't know what they intended. We're just using it as an example, but you are correct that 80% would be really hard to measure here. I would agree that is not measurable. But what is the method of measuring progress? How are we going to measure that? So we're going to use a portfolio. That's what they wrote. They work portfolio, which is the same as work samples. So we're using work samples and we're looking at 80% of the samples. So in their mind, I guess it could have been 80% of samples, but what would have been a better way to write? Does anybody have an idea? What would be a better way? If your skill that you're looking at is just that they're going to write an essay that follows those things, what would be a better way? You could say in 4 out of 5 attempts, so 4 out of 5 essays, and in 4 of those essays he's going to write 3 paragraphs that have an introductory sentence and 3 supporting details and a closing sentence. You could say 4 out of 5 samples. You could say I really think that's the only way that this goal would work, would be 4 out of 5 samples. But if anybody has any other ideas, you can throw them in the chat. You could do that. He's going to do it at least 3 times to master it. You may have to be careful with that one, because if he may do it once and then never do it for months and then do it, and so you may want something a little bit more. Measure with a rubric would be a good one. If you remember our previous goal where we were self-reflecting internally, we could use this same idea here and use a rubric where he's checking off that he has those components, and our 80% comes from those rubrics. That's a good idea. You could do 3 times without adult support.
All right, I'm going to go to the next one. I have a question that I'm getting translated and we'll go back to it.
Okay. Okay. So this is a real example of a present level, and we're going to read it and we're going to talk about what's missing. Students' present level includes but is not limited to classroom grades, work samples, full spectrum psychological evaluations, and teacher observations. She knows her numbers and can add and subtract single digit numbers. So what is missing? Tell me in the chat what you think is missing. And what does that tell us about what she needs for math? Right, we're missing what we don't know what she needs. We don't know, really, we know that she knows numbers and she can add and subtract. It's not specific enough. So it tells us one piece of information about her. Do you see any data? Exactly. We don't know anything about this child based on this present level of performance. Could you read this? Could you read this and tell us what it means, what kind of goal she needs? Do you know what she doesn't know? So when we look at any present level, we should be able to see what she can do, what she cannot do, and how it is affecting her ability to access the general education environment. So why she needs special education. So right now, all we know is that she has been given some assessments. We don't know what those assessments say. We just know that she knows her numbers and can add and subtract single digit numbers. Okay, Mandy, next slide. So I want to show you what goal came from this present level. This is the goal that came from that present level. Student will be able to recognize and draw shapes having specified attributes such as a given number of angles or a given number of equal faces with 90% accuracy in 4 out of 5 trials. Now in the chat, tell me, did you know that the goal would be about shapes from that present level we just read? Absolutely not. There's another huge problem with this goal. This goal has 2 different skills that draw upon each other. So student has to both recognize and draw the shapes that have those specified attributes. So she's required to see it, recognize it, which in this case meant labeling it, and also to draw it. If student cannot recognize it, is she going to be able to draw it? It is. There's a lot of, this is a lot of goals all at once. And again, our present level didn't tell us what she needed. It didn't tell us what we were looking at. It didn't tell us anything about this kiddo. And so if I was in this meeting, I would be very confused. Can you imagine if your child changed school districts and you handed this IEP to the new teacher and she read that present level and then she read this goal? Wouldn't you be confused? Because somehow we went from adding single-digit numbers to drawing numbers of angles and faces. You're right. We would hope that somebody in that meeting would stop this. But as parents and educators, the best thing we can do is to be informed so that when we're in meetings, we can advocate the best that we can for our kiddos. Because as somebody else commented, this does happen all the time. Every example that I am using in this presentation was a real one that was sent to us. So next slide. Oh, wait. So we're going to measure this with 90% accuracy and formal assessments and student work samples. So what does 90% accuracy look like in 4 out of 5 trials? Now, this is actually very common. We actually see this a lot. So 90% accuracy is the mastery. When you see 4 out of 5 trials, that's usually referring to the generalization for after you have mastered a skill. So because like 4 out of 5 trials is also 90%. So it is a good way. It's a good thing to ask what they mean, because every teacher, you are right, 4 out of 5 is 80%, my bad. So everybody is going to explain this differently to you. So ask them what they mean when they include 2 criterions. So if they're saying 90% in 4 out of 5 trials, ask them what they mean, because every district has a different answer to what that means. And some of them will tell you to only use 1. That's why sometimes you will have kids who only have in 4 out of 5 trials, and some will only come with in this percentage accuracy. So make sure you ask them what they mean when they write that, because really this is 2 different mastery levels. They're not the same. And we need to know what they mean for your child. What does this mean for your child? Okay, so this is another one. Student's present level in reading has shown she is able to recognize vocabulary words and does better in the area of reading comprehension. Tell me what is missing. So this is a present level. This is not a goal. This is what we're going to use to inform our goal. We're going to look at the goal next. What do we know about this child's ability to read? There is no data. We don't see any assessment information. We don't see anything from the previous IEP. You're absolutely right. Everything is missing. You're right. The teacher was probably not fully prepared. We don't know what level she's reading at. We just know that it shows that she's able to recognize some vocabulary words. Right. There's no explanation here. There's no explanation for what this child knows. We don't know what she doesn't know. And we certainly don't know how it relates to her typically developing peers. So we don't know what special education she requires. We don't know what she needs. And if you read that and that was all you had, would you know what kind of goal to write? Because really, when you're teaching and you're writing a present level, you should be able to look at that present level and know exactly what that child needs. Do you know what she needs? So this was the goal. Student will be able to answer such questions as who, what, where, when, why, and how to determine understanding of key details in a text when given with 90% accuracy in 4 out of 5 trials. You're correct. She said she could comprehend. Mandy, will you go back one slide for just a second? So let's see, it says that she does better in the area of reading comprehension and that she's able to recognize vocabulary words. Okay, so forward once more, ma'am. So they want her to work on who, what, where, when, why, and how so that she can understand key details. Would you have known she needed to work on who, what, when, where, and how based on that definition? Absolutely not. We don't know anything about her from that present level. So we don't know anything except she knows some vocabulary words, and we don't know what level of vocabulary words she's working on. We don't know what level of text she is comprehending. We just know she was doing better. Now let's talk about that phrase. When you see that in any IEP, doing better, is that a concrete notion, doing better? That could mean that I did one word better. That could mean I did a whole book better. Who better than what? Exactly. Better than what? We don't know what better than what. We don't want subjective phrases in our IEP. That's why it's so important that everybody is clear and concise, that everybody I'm sorry, the chat made me laugh too much of a teacher's feelings on that day. So we don't want people's feelings in our IEPs. We don't want our opinions. If you read the present level and you don't know what that child knows and what they don't know and why it matters, then we need to start over. Because to have a good goal, you have to be able to understand what they need and why they need it. So, given a text, student will be able to answer who, what, when, where, why, and how questions in a text. You know, we're looking at comprehension, even though they said she was doing better. But because she was just doing better, how do we know that 90% accuracy is better than where she was? Because we don't know where she was. So when we're going to talk about we want 90% accuracy now, where was she at before? Was she doing 75% accuracy? Was she doing 50% accuracy? What were we doing before? If we don't know where we were, then we don't know where we're going. For example, I was talking to a family earlier. Your IEP is a roadmap for a year. It's your year roadmap. These are the goals. We have a year to get there. We do want them to be challenging, but we also want them to be attainable. But to get anywhere on a map, you have to know where you're going. You have to have an end point in mind. What skill are we working on? What do we need to get there? Next, ma'am. I promise I've got some that do a good job in here too. So, based on EC resource data, student is able to solve two-step word problems involving addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with a minimum of 85% accuracy. He's able to independently identify the necessary operations in each step. He's also participating in a number worlds program where he is working in level F, which was based upon his number knowledge test. Number worlds is helping target students' needs that were evident in the number knowledge test, mentally working with larger number mixed with vocabulary. Student is working on increasing his multi-digit division skills and isolation, and that will carry over into increasing the complexity of two-step word problems. So lots of things happening here. This is better than what we had. Tell me one problem and one good thing with this goal. Let's see, there are some pros and cons here. Right, so we have data. Data is good. There is something interesting with the data here. So similar to exactly, if you aren't familiar with the program, you can't determine what's happening. You don't know what number worlds program is and what level F means. We don't know what the results were on his number knowledge text. We don't know. It says that the program is helping to target his needs. They did give us one example of one of the things that said his needs were. Exactly. We're making an assumption that everyone in our IEP meeting and everybody at our table understands these assessments. If you are in this meeting, one of the first things you would want to do is ask, what is this program? What are these results? And the same thing with iReady results. What does this level mean? Now, some people put exactly what it means in that little assessment box above, and you'll be able to see it. But not everybody updates that. It is not family friendly. So when we write these, they should be written in such a way that everybody at the table can understand it, that everybody knows what it means. And sometimes teachers and even doctors on medical, we speak in a lot of jargon and a lot of words that don't have any meaning to anybody else. Even at ECAC, we talk a lot about FAPE and a lot about IDEA and a lot about PLAFs, and that's not helpful because everybody doesn't know what those acronyms mean and what these tests reference. We don't know what these tests reference. Honestly, I have not done this type of math in a very long time. And when I read increasing his multi-digit division skills in isolation, I was confused because I had to read it a couple of times to understand what we were talking about, just because how long has it been since we all did multi-digit division? It's been a while for me. It's not a skill I use on a daily basis. The other thing is, at the very first sentence here says that he is able to solve two-step word problems involving addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with a minimum of 85% accuracy. The problem I have with that is it may be a little nitpicky, but which one is he struggling the most with? Because is he doing better with some? I don't like the way that's written. Minimum of 85%. Which one are we doing the minimum of 85%? And what percentage? What's the data for the rest of it? How are we doing on two-step word problems involving addition? What about subtraction? We can separate them. There's space to separate them. They don't have to be written like this. I agree. Mandy, do you want to speak a little bit about that as a military family moving state to state with
Yeah.
IEP?
It is very difficult. I've lived that life personally with my family and my children. And I can tell you, we talk about that interpretation piece. And so, traveling from installation to installation to meet the needs of the military for my husband, we just found with the IEPs, there could be no room for interpretation. And those acronyms really needed to be left out. So that is something we really focused on. And if you are a military family and you're relocating, feel free to reach out to us and get connected. And I can help you review your IEP and, look at some verbiage. And if you're leaving North Carolina and maybe headed to Florida or whatnot, we can help you get connected to your next parent training information center. But it is very true and it is very frustrating.
It is frustrating. So this was the goal. Given a two-step word problem involving one or more of the 4 operations, student will accurately solve the problems with a 90% accuracy. So let's go back for a second, Mandy. If you'll recall, our first sentence here says he's able to solve these two-step word problems involving addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division with a minimum of 85% accuracy. And we're going forward one more time, Mandy. So we are now going to 90. We're 90%. So we've gone up by 5. But my problem here is I still don't think that goal, that the data suggested he was below 90 in all 4. It said minimum of 85%. So it suggests that there was better. Some of those areas were better. If this is what we're working on, do you feel like this is a challenging goal for our friend here? Do you feel like this is ambitious? I don't think this is a challenging goal. That's a good point. The last 2, Mandy, you know what I'm gonna ask next? We're gonna go in reverse. Okay, so it says he's working on increasing his multi-digit division skills that will carry over to increasing the complexity of two-step word problems. So would that not lead you to believe that the part he was struggling with was the division? We could just have had a goal working on division and working on multi-digit division skills if that is where he's struggling. Does 85% suggest struggling though to you? If 85% of the time we are able to solve division problems that are two-step word problems, is that what we need to work on? And this is something to ask, like, how long is too long to spend on a goal? How long is too long to spend on a goal? Because it's not enough to just occasionally, it's not enough to just occasionally increase it by 5%. The government that, the federal government says that these need to be challenging. Is this we're not challenging this kiddo. We're not challenging him at all. We are giving him a little bump to help, but there's likely other skills that he needs to work on. This particular kiddo is transitioning to high school next year. I feel like there's a large gap between two-step division and where we maybe need to be for high school. There are a lot of skills we could work on. And if we are at almost 90% here, is it better to keep focusing on this goal, or is it time to move on to something else? That is a family by family question. But it's important to advocate for where you believe. But we can all agree that this is not challenging. This is not effective. He's got a whole year now to work on increasing by 5%. When he could be working on things that are better. When he could be working on things that make more sense. That will help him to better bridge the gap between himself and his peers. Adding 5% additional when some of his typical peers may have 85% on this too, So that brings up another question. 5%, does he really need an IEP? Well, it depends. This skill would be several years behind, right? Several years behind where his peers are. So there are probably a lot of other skills they could work on. Sometimes you'll find teams clinging to the same goal over and over, wanting to get higher and higher levels of mastery. And that depends on your kid, whether you're okay with that. Because if your kiddo needs to work on division, but they also need to work on time telling, fractions, and all these other things, once you reach 90%, in division, should we continue forward? If you have met the criteria, so let's say that the previous year's goal was that he would get 85% in two-step word problems for addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So his goal was 85% for that type. So he's met that goal. And the only thing we have done is said that this year we're going to go 90 because we want to do better. We want to get this kid to 100%. But at the same time, he needs help with fractions. He needs help with time. He needs help with geometry. Are we helping him with that stuff if we're stuck on this goal that he has pretty much mastered? And that's something to think about when we're having these same goals over and over and over and over. And if you're having the same goals over and over and over again, we need to look at our instructional practices. Now, we're not really talking about that here tonight. We do have a webinar next month called Best Practices, where we will touch a little bit upon that. But we need to look at our instructional practices if in a year there's no growth and we're trying to recycle goals. Because if there's no growth in a year, then we need to look at that. Either our goal was too challenging, or we need to look at what our instructional methods are. And because of that, it is so important that you are regularly reviewing your present level, your progress notes, and regularly looking at the raw data. Because as families, we would like to trust that our teachers are always doing their best by our kids. And a lot of them are. There are a lot of fabulous teachers. As parents, though, it's our job only to advocate for our kiddo. And we know that teachers have a lot going on, and there's a lot happening, and they're overextended and overworked. But at the end of the day, our priority is our kiddo. And sometimes it takes parents to say, hey, this just doesn't look right. We shouldn't still be working on the same goal every year, going from 85 to 90 to 95 to 100. when we could have used those years. Okay, we're proficient in this skill. Let's move to the next skill that we need to work on. We can still do check-ins. We could still do some support. But it is important that we always, this is why it's so important when they ask you about the vision statement at the beginning, even at a young age, you need to know where you are going. Where do you want to see your, what skills does he or she need to get there? Have you got that, Mandy? Mandy, can you cut in for just a second?
What did I miss?
Okay, hopefully that's right. I was trying to reassign the interpreter.
Sorry, it didn't come through on mine. Sorry, we're having some technical difficulty with Zoom at the moment.
Okay, next slide. Now our next slide is really long.
I'm no longer assigned as an interpreter for
Okay,
whatever
maybe-
reason.
Anastasia, you go ahead and read this, make me host, and I will see, or if you want to take a moment.
Right here, you can be the host and figure that out. There you go. Okay, so this one is really long and we're going to take our time to work through it. Now, this is a social emotional goal. So we're going to work through it, and then when Mandy's back, we're going to have her highlight things for us. So the student's relative strength as it relates to social emotional learning that impacts her ability to access the grade level curriculum is her ability to vocalize her basic wants and needs. We're going to go through one sentence at a time. Did that sentence make sense to you? No. So while this is actually a good example of present level, one of the things that it fails to do is it fails to take into account readability for parents. So what she's saying in this sentence is this student can vocalize her basic wants and needs. That's all that that sentence says. Her strength right now is she can vocalize her basic wants and needs. Okay, second sentence. While on the first virtual instruction session, which started the academic year and ended at the end of September, the student is displaying high rates of responding as evidenced by increased percentages in accuracy in English and math contents. The student is also displaying 100% success of logging in and remaining logged in for the entire duration of the session, which is 20 minutes for math, 20 minutes for English, and 10 minutes for social emotional learning. Okay, so from that sentence, kiddo is logging into her sessions and attending class. Where she's logging in and attending class, I'm assuming that that was an issue before because we said that that was a strength at this point. Okay. The student transitioned to on-campus instruction with a delayed start and on modified half-day of instruction. Okay. Student had the chance to access the curriculum while in person for 21 instructional days, being absent 19% of the time. While on campus, she engaged in ELA 83% of the time, math 66% of the time, social skills 75%, elective 16% of the time, social studies 33% of the time. She engaged with instructional materials for a total duration of 20 minutes, 83% of the time. Okay, so that's how long she is attending to sessions of class. While on campus, the student engaged in behaviors of concern ranging from, but not limited to, elopement, which is leaving the classroom or leaving the area that class is at, throwing objects, hitting, kicking, refusing to work, sleeping, destruction of property, screaming, crying, sleeping, putting her head down, and not responding. These behaviors resulted in 7 minor incidents and 2 major incidents. All incidents required multiple adults to assist and to utilize evidence-based practices to assist students through periods of non-compliance, as well as safety-related concerns, which impacted her ability to access curriculum. The student's issues with communication, elopement, and aggression adversely impact her ability to access grade level curriculum and require intensive instruction within the small group setting with additional support and accommodations. Okay, so from this present level, we know kiddo is not attending to or engaging in all of her class sessions. She's having substantial behaviors. Behaviors are requiring a lot of support. And because she has behaviors that are requiring such substantial support, she's having difficulty accessing the curriculum. Now, they collected great data on how she was engaging in the classroom. And they probably, on a behavior plan, have some other great data about these incidences. But can you tell right this moment what we're going to work on? What are we going to do for this kiddo to change this? Because that's what we're saying. This is what the present level is saying. What can she do? She can vocalize her basic wants and needs. What does she need? She needs to engage in all of her classroom activities by eliminating some of this behavior, because these behaviors are preventing her from accessing her classroom environment. She can't learn because she's having all these behaviors. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do, Mandy? Can we go to the next slide, Mandy? Okay, so when encouraged by adults, student will utilize her safe space or activities such as a break it bin, fidget, walking, art, or other items she can manipulate with her hands within 3 minutes of second prompt and 7 out of 10 opportunities. So I 100% agree. We could address one behavior at a time. So hopefully they're not saying a child has behaviors because they don't want to teach. We're going to, as a practice, I try to believe that everybody has the best intentions. It is hard. It is hard. Wouldn't a goal of knowing what and when to express her needs be necessary to progress? So they said that she could express her needs. So one goal in addition could be she will express her needs prior to having said behavior, or when the behavior starts, you could give her something. But let's look at the goal that we have and see what we see. So when encouraged by adults, so that is our given. So she's going to be given encouragement by adults, and then she's going to be given a safe place or activities that she can choose, and she needs to make a choice within 3 minutes of the second prompt. So this team is recognizing that this kiddo is not immediately ready to jump into these activities, and she's going to need their support. And they only said 7 out of 10 opportunities. Now, if a child is not doing this at all, 7 might still be too high to start off with. I don't know this child, so I don't know if that's the case. But you really want, when you're seeing how many opportunities, it needs to be challenging, but it needs to be achievable. And if you're trying to go from 0 to 90%, that's not always achievable in a year. And 0 to 70% might not be achievable. There are kiddos out here who we're just, we're starting at 70, and then we are going to have to work up to a 90% rate. This goal is meant to work on her ability to stay in the class because she's leaving, she's demonstrating aggression, and they want to replace that behavior. So they want to replace those behaviors with this behavior. So they want to teach her to use these things instead. And they want her to do it within 3 minutes of a second prompt. Now, many of you said that her present level was super long. If that was your kiddo, even though it has great data, would you have some questions? I think I would have a lot of questions, because even though everything in there is probably accurate, it's not easy to understand. And because it's not easy to understand, it makes it hard for us to see that roadmap, right? It makes it hard for us to know where we're going. We know kiddo has behaviors. We know that those behaviors are impacting her ability to be in her classroom. But we don't know what we're going to do about it, or what skills she has, other than the one strength they said was she could vocalize her wants and her needs. So another goal they could have given her is, given a choice board, she will choose one of these activities instead. And we may be progressing there. It may just be starting to teach this replacement behavior. And the next year you would see that she would just be given a list of activities, and she would be expected to respond in the first prompt 90% of the time. Social emotional goals can be a little bit wordier and a little bit less explicit sometimes when they're written. And I think that's because people do have a hard time keeping their emotions out of some of the goals that have behaviors. So it's very important as a parent that we are reading these and we're saying, hey, that does not make sense. Hey, this is very technical. What are you trying to say here? Because an educator can read that same statement and they may 100% know exactly what's happening, but it's not clear to everybody. And we need for these present levels to be clear to everybody. For example, they could have said also with data, this student engages in these behaviors when X, Y, and Z happens. This is affecting her ability to engage with her typical peers. These are things that she can do instead, and we're going to work on teaching. There was nothing in there that told us what skills she needed to work on to improve that, just that she needs to improve those behaviors. And so a lot of times, look at your social emotional goals a second time, because everyone has the best intention and they want them to be clear and they want their present levels to be clear and understandable, I would hope. But we read a lot of them and they're very vague and they're not specific and they don't have any data. So when we're looking at what a good goal is, that's what it needs to have. And it needs to have the criterion, it needs to have the mastery level, and it needs to get us from point A to point B. So we need to be clear, specific, and concise. We need to challenge our kids. But we need to be very proactive as parents. And this is why I always suggest that you ask for a draft ahead of time. So a few days ahead of your meeting, ask for a draft so you can read it. If you have a friend or you have somebody else you'd like to read it, you can even ask us. A lot, we're willing to help also. And read it ahead of time. See what makes sense, because otherwise you're in a meeting that's an hour, 2 hours, sometimes longer long, and all this information is thrown at you and you don't even have time to think about what it says. You don't have time to process what is happening. And you may have a lot of questions, but they come up after the meeting because you didn't have time to think and to digest this information. So looking at the chat, are you able to get drafts of assessments before results meeting? Yes, you can ask for drafts, evaluations for initial eligibilities, and even sometimes for reevaluation. Sometimes they're not done until a few days ahead, but you can always say, let's reschedule this meeting so them have additional time. As a parent, you have the right to have the same information as the team. And if you don't have that information, how can you be a participating team member? You are a part of the team and you deserve to have the same information. So ask for a copy, review it, take notes, write down what you understand, what you don't understand. Look at the data. Compare the data that you see in the IEP to the data that you've gotten home measure as your progress notes. Make sure that it all matches up. How does a parent approach pushback? So there are lots of ways you can address pushback. So if you're in a meeting and it is not going well, you can table the meeting and say, hey, I don't think this is going well and we need to meet again. This is not working. Tensions are a little bit too high. Let's take a break. Let's come back. Have a few days available on your calendar that you can say we can meet any of these days. Let's pick a date, but we need to come back to the table because this is just not going well. Another thing you can say is, okay, you're saying he needs some time. Let's establish a time period. Let's take 6 weeks. We're going to try it the way you're suggesting. Or you can try it the way I'm suggesting for 6 weeks. Let's look at the data. Let's see if it's working. They can do trial periods even before they put something in the IEP. They can do a trial period of certain things for 6 weeks to see if it's helping. And if you're getting pushback, suggest that. Say, okay, you're saying that he doesn't need this. I really think he does. Could we try it for 6 weeks and let's take the data and let's see how it works? Well, they are supposed to give you the handbooks. We actually provide a handbook that was written by the Duke Law students, which is a little bit easier to understand. And I will send it out tomorrow as part of like the information that I'm going to send to you guys after this webinar. It's a little bit easier to understand, though longer. And I'll send you that. But if they are not getting it, then tell them, hey, I didn't get this. I need to get this. They are required to offer it at least once per year. How can you actively participate without knowing what the evaluations and IEP says? That is a great question. And that is always my question. Always get a draft. And if it's not ready, say, okay, well, let's reschedule this meeting. Or you can attend the meeting and get the draft there, and you can table it and take some time to consider what they're offering and what's on the table. You have a right to participate. You have a right to be involved in this process. This is your child. We believe you are the expert on your child. And the best way to advocate for your kiddo is to be informed and have the same information they have. You had a vision teacher say that she does not provide drafts, and you had a lot of questions during the meeting. If you need support, Mandy's going to drop our link to a parent educator in the chat, and you can contact us for help. You email a PDF of the handbook at every meeting. That is a great way to do it. That makes sure everybody gets it every single time. What can you do if the parent speaks Spanish? The state does have a Spanish printed parent responsibilities handbook. Also, if a parent speaks Spanish, they have the right to an interpreter to be at that meeting and to help so that they can interpret, because again, you still have the right in any language to have meaningful participation. What is meaningful participation? That is where you are actively able to be involved and understand. It needs to be at your level. It needs to be where you have the information you need and is requested. You can't have meaningful participation if you don't have access to the same information the team has. Just to wrap up, I'm going to answer that question in just a second. Present levels, just as our wrap up, present levels should provide data that indicates exactly where a child is functioning. you should be able to hand me a present level and I can read it and I will know exactly what kind of goals your child should have, because that present level drives the goals and the mastery criteria. And goals need to be clear, concise, and measurable. We need to be able to read those goals. We need to know what the child is going to be given to get there. We need to know what skill they're working on, and we need to know how it's going to be measured. And if you don't understand how it's going to be measured in that meeting, you need to ask. I'm going to answer questions. Mandy, if you want to go ahead and talk about the poll and launch the poll.
Absolutely. 1 second to pull it up. Maybe. We've gone and broke the internet. All right, so the projects we work on require that we provide them with feedback that we're providing high quality, relevant information. So we're going to launch a poll, and if you could take a moment to answer these 4 questions: that this information was useful, high quality, that it was relevant to your child or your work. And I'm going to go ahead and launch that now.
So private schools, while you guys are answering the poll, I will also be answering questions if you just put them in the chat. So private schools, because they do not receive federal funding, they are not required to have IEPs. Now, you can go through the school district to get an IEP, but this private school is not required to implement it. And so if you want an IEP, the private school may not work for that, but some private schools do offer other supports. You'll have to talk with your specific school. 504 plans. We have a 504 plan webinar coming up in August. And I will be happy to put the information for that at the end in the email I send you. At the end of the meeting, if the family that speaks Spanish gets the paper and they're in English, what can they do? Mandy, you have any ideas?
I apologize. I was reading another message directly to us in the chat. What was your question? I'm sorry.
There's some questions about families, like, because even though there's an interpreter there, the paperwork that they get is still sent home in English. Now, obviously, they can ask for it to be written in the home language, but I know a lot of families may not do that or know that.
Yeah,
Any
I
other
think
ideas?
it's really, yeah, just, when you are working with those families, or maybe this pertains to you, ask for the school to provide it to you in your native language. It's really important. That way you have access. It can truly be an active participant and be a part of that IEP team. I'm going to answer this other question in here, Anastasia. Give me 1 moment.
You're going to answer the one that just came in?
There's some Spanish questions coming through to you and I'm responding. Give me a moment.
Okay. To find out what your homeschool is, you can usually go on the district's website and they will be able to, there's usually like a feature where you can find it. You can also call the central office and they can tell you. If you don't like to call people, you can also Google your house. And when it was on the market, it will also tell you what school district it's in. That's more for my introverted friends like myself. I'm looking for an apartment and also like Googling addresses to see what school districts we're in. But the school district can point you to the correct school. I certainly agree. A lot of information should be volunteered to parents more readily. But you can always come to help come to us for help, and there are some other organizations that you can come to for help in accessing some of this information. Well, that is certainly concerning that that happened. That family can certainly get in contact with us and we would be happy to help them. Really, you want to leave with the finalized copy, unless you tabled the meeting, in which case you wouldn't want to leave with the final copy. But really, you should leave that meeting with a finalized copy and a finalized prior written notice. And please hear finalized prior written notice, because some teams are telling families that they should leave, that they can go because the prior written notice is just a summary of decisions. We're just talking about everything we've already talked about. But that is a summary of all decisions made during the IEP meeting. And it is much harder to say, no, I don't agree with that if you're not there. Because afterwards, if you're commenting afterwards, it can turn into a he said, she said, because people don't always remember things the same way. So make sure you stay through the completion of that form.
And I just want to add, we're getting some questions in the chat in Spanish. And so I want to encourage those who are messaging me. I have been responding, but please reach out to us. I put the link in the chat and get connected to one of our Spanish speaking parent educators, and they will gladly assist you. And I'm going to put that in the chat again, but I just wanted I know there's several. Please know that I am responding, but I will also put the link in the chat to get connected with one of our Spanish speaking parent educators. And we do also offer support in 6 other languages.
I don't know that you can add a comment to the evaluation if you've already closed it, but you can always email us a comment. I agree, wait for the prior written notice. You can ask them to read the minutes. Mandy just put in the chat how to get connected with a parent educator. If you just fill out that form, somebody will contact you. We are closed Monday and we work a shortened schedule tomorrow for the holiday, but we do work all summer. Minutes are not required. A lot of the bigger districts do them, but they are not a required piece. You are welcome to always take your own and detail your own minutes account, but they are not a required piece. So some districts do them and some don't. If your district does not do minutes, please make sure that your prior written notice is thorough and accounts for everything that was discussed and said during that meeting, because you're going to want that document later if anything happens. I agree. Write down everything. I was at an IEP meeting today. I wrote down everything, pages and pages. Okay, does anybody have any other questions? The chat is moving kind of fast, so if we missed it, just put it back in. I see, are these just for parents? Are what specifically? Just for parents? Oh, our webinars? No, we have professionals attend regularly as well. So can you record an IEP session? That's so funny. Somebody just asked that in the other one. So Mandy. You're muted. So we live in a one-party consent state. But we can't give legal advice. I would ask your team how they feel if you let everybody know. Mandy.
Sorry, go ahead. I was translating on the backside. All right, go ahead.
Oh, IEP is being recorded.
So I always just think teamwork is a dream work, and being open, honest, and just, you don't want to burn a bridge at the end of the day. So if you're going to record, even though we're a one consent party state, I would just let the school know so they have the opportunity to record as well. But that's kind of, best practice. And, for me, if there's notes not being taken, and we all know IEP meetings can be stressful. There are times where I know several families that record, but the school also records. So they just have that open relationship, and the mom's just like, hey, I won't remember 50% of this, so I need to record. And, that's what they do. I hope that answered that person's question. I apologize. I'm sitting here translating and then recording questions.
Okay, for the transition from elementary to middle school, what important points do you want to take into consideration? You're going to want to think about how the schedule is different, what supports, and you're also going to want to think about supports that elementary schools are naturally going to have embedded in their classrooms, such as some of them have wiggle seats or specific types of seating. Some of them are more likely to have like fidget toys for breaks. You're going to want to think about what they already have embedded that they're doing for your kiddo. And you're going to want to make sure that you have that stuff put on the IEP. You're going to want to think about the difference in the class structure. They may be going from having one teacher to having 4 or 5, what needs to be done to help with that schedule. And the move to middle school, there's a greater amount of independence required with like assignments, remembering homework, teachers expect more. And so making sure you're thinking about what your kiddo needs to be successful with those. I saw a question about wood shop and the school saying that the kiddo maybe couldn't do it because of lack of support. I would ask them if he could try it at the beginning of the school year, see if they're willing to let him try it. And if he does well, that's great. And if he doesn't do well, because how do they know that that's what he's going to need if he's never done wood shop? Similar to many other teenagers or middle schoolers in wood shop type environments, those are classrooms that, or even cooking. You're working with tools, you're working with sharp objects. Every kid has to learn, and other high schoolers don't always pay attention either. And so ask if they're willing to try it, because it's a hard line to say, oh, this kid is going to need if he's never tried it. And see if they're willing to provide that extra support or have him near the teacher for the activity, just to give him a chance to participate. Okay, we have about 5 more minutes if anybody has additional questions.
I am working on the one in the chat at the moment.
Well, in Spanish, if you want to write FBA and a BIP.
Yes.
That's very true. So if your kiddo has an IEP and there are behaviors, go ahead and ask about a functional behavior assessment. Sometimes schools will say they want to try other things first. Go ahead and say, okay, well, let's put a time limit on that. Let's put a time limit on that. Let's put it like 6 weeks, like, okay, you can try what you're doing for this amount of time. And then we need to proceed.
All right. Well, if you have not completed the poll, go ahead and do so before we go ahead and log off. I'm going to stop recording.